My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a freelance graphic designer. I was huddled in the cramped space between my antique wardrobe and the wall, heart hammering against my ribs, listening to the unmistakable splintering sound of wood around my apartment's deadbolt. My phone was pressed to my ear, the 911 operator's calm voice a thin lifeline against the fear churning in my stomach. Just minutes before, a text message had flashed on my screen, blunt and chilling. You need to run, Sarah. Get out. Now. It was from Mr. Thorne, my landlord. I'd stared at it, a cold knot forming in my gut, but I hadn't run. I couldn't. This was my home. I had ignored his demand, and now, the heavy thud that rattled the floorboards told me he was inside. The brass lion's head door knocker, a charming detail I'd loved when I moved in, felt like a cruel joke now, mocking the illusion of security. I heard his heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through my living room. He thought he could scare me out of my own apartment, but he was about to learn that some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. To understand why I stayed, why I didn't just pack a bag and flee the second that text came through, you have to know a little about the apartment and Mr. Thorne himself. I'd moved into my Beacon Hill apartment almost 2 years ago. It was a gem, a spacious one-bedroom with high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and huge bay windows overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. Boston rents are brutal, but this place, while not cheap, was a steal for its size and location. It felt like I'd found a little piece of history I could call my own. Mr. Silas Thorne, the landlord, was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and a perpetually rumpled tweed jacket. When I first met him, he seemed like a character straight out of a classic New England novel, charmingly eccentric, full of stories about the building's past, and seemingly proud of his well-maintained properties. He owned several brownstones in the neighborhood, a true old-money Bostonian, or so he presented himself. He had a way of looking at you over the top of his spectacles that made you feel simultaneously scrutinized and a little special. The lease was standard, a year-long agreement, renewable. I signed it without a second thought, captivated by the promise of quiet living in such a beautiful space. My work as a freelance graphic designer meant I spent most of my days at home. This was perfect for me. I thrived on the solitude and the ability to control my own schedule. The apartment became my sanctuary, filled with my art supplies, my collection of vintage books, and the comforting hum of my computer. For the first year, things were mostly fine. Mr. Thorne would pop by occasionally, always with a plausible reason, checking a leaky faucet in the unit below, inspecting the roof, or just making sure everything was all right. He never gave much notice, often just a quick text an hour before, or sometimes just a knock on the door. It felt a little intrusive, but I chalked it up to his old-school style. He'd always compliment my decor, or my work setup, then leave. What I didn't understand yet was that these casual visits were subtly testing my boundaries, seeing how much I'd tolerate. The subtle shift started about 6 months ago. My lease was due for renewal, and Mr. Thorne had been unusually slow in sending the new paperwork. When it finally arrived, the rent had increased by a significant amount, more than the market average, but still within what I could manage, just barely. I signed it, relieved to secure my home for another year. A few weeks later, he began talking about necessary upgrades to the building. He'd stop me in the hallway or call me, describing vague plans for plumbing overhauls, electrical work, and even structural improvements. It's an old building, Sarah, he'd say, gesturing vaguely, needs to be brought into the 21st century. Might be a bit disruptive, you understand. He'd always mentioned that these disruptions would be so extensive that it would be impractical for tenants to remain in their units. He started asking about my work schedule, when I was usually out, how long I typically stayed away. It felt less like a landlord planning renovations and more like a general probing of my habits. Then came the first concrete demand. About 2 months ago, he called me, his voice losing its usual charming lilt. Sarah, he began, I've been thinking about the renovations. They're going to be quite extensive. We're going to need the building vacant for at least 3 months, maybe more. I think it would be best if you started looking for a temporary place now. He offered me a sum of $1,500 to cover moving expenses and a month's rent elsewhere. It was a paltry sum, barely enough to cover a security deposit in Boston, let alone 3 months of rent and 2 moves. "Mr. Thorne," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. My lease doesn't expire for another 10 months. And there's nothing in it about vacating for renovations." He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Well, of course not, Sarah. It's an old lease. But these things come up. It's for the good of the building. We're talking about safety, you know." He made it sound like I was being unreasonable, even dangerous, by wanting to stay in my own apartment. I told him I needed to review my options and would get back to him. That was when the numbers stopped looking accidental. I realized he wasn't offering to help, he was offering to buy me out on the cheap. The renovations became his constant refrain. Every time I saw him, every phone call, it was about the impending work. He started leaving flyers for temporary housing agencies in my mailbox, even though I'd repeatedly told him I wasn't interested in moving. The lion's head knocker on my door, which once felt like a symbol of permanence, now seemed to vibrate with his unspoken pressure. I started keeping a log of his calls and visits, noting the dates and times, and the increasingly aggressive tone of his suggestions. A month ago, he sent an official-looking letter, not from a lawyer, but from himself, outlining the imminent structural work and stating that, due to the nature of the repairs, all tenants would need to temporarily relocate. It still offered the same $1,500. I consulted a friend who was a paralegal. She confirmed that without a proper legal eviction notice, or a clause in my lease allowing him to force me out for renovations, he couldn't do this. I sent him a polite but firm email, referencing my lease and stating that I intended to remain in my apartment. I also asked for a detailed schedule of the proposed work and the permits. He never replied. His visits became less frequent after that, but the tension in the air was palpable. I started noticing small things, a faint scuff mark on my door frame that hadn't been there before, a slight misalignment of the deadbolt. It was almost imperceptible, but it made me uneasy. I started double-checking my locks every night. I even bought a small, inexpensive security camera that connected to my phone, positioning it discreetly to face the door. I thought that was the worst of it. It wasn't. Then came yesterday. I was working on a tight deadline, immersed in a new branding project, when my phone buzzed with the text message, "You need to run, Sarah. Get out. Now." No pleasantries, no vague explanations, just a raw command. My heart leaped into my throat. I texted back immediately, "Mr. Thorne, what are you talking about? I need a proper explanation and notice." No reply. I tried calling him, it went straight to voicemail. I sat there, staring at the message, a cold certainty settling over me. He wasn't asking me to leave for renovations anymore. He was trying to intimidate me, to scare me into abandoning my home. I looked around my apartment, at the life I had built here, and a surge of defiance pushed past the fear. I wasn't going to run. Not from my home. Not from a bully. I decided to send him one last text, stating that I would not be leaving without a legal eviction notice and proper compensation, and that I knew my tenant rights. I hit send, my finger trembling slightly. About 20 minutes later, I heard it. A faint scraping sound at my door, then a distinct click that wasn't my lock. I froze. My security camera app flashed a notification, "Motion detected at front door." I opened the app, and there, on my phone screen, was a live feed of Mr. Thorne. He was fumbling with something at my lock. He had a set of keys, but he was struggling with the deadbolt. He was trying to get in. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just changed the locks, he was breaking in. That's when I scrambled behind the wardrobe, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The splintering sound, the heavy thud, the measured footsteps. He was inside. The 911 operator kept me on the line, telling me to stay quiet, to remain hidden. I could hear him moving through my living room, then into the kitchen. He wasn't calling out my name, just moving, as if surveying his territory. I heard the clink of something in the kitchen, then the creak of the floorboards as he moved towards the bedroom. My bedroom. I held my breath, clutching my phone, my knuckles white. He paused just outside the bedroom door, then pushed it open slowly. The camera feed showed him standing there, looking into the empty room. He took a step inside, then another, his eyes scanning the space. He looked directly at the wardrobe, and for a terrifying second, I thought he saw me. He didn't. He just stood there for a moment, then turned and walked out, retracing his steps. I heard the front door open, then close with a soft click. He was gone. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, were calm and professional. I showed them the text message, the video footage from my security camera, and explained the history of his demands. They inspected the door. The deadbolt was damaged, clearly forced. They took my statement, noting the illegal entry. "This is a clear case of trespassing and illegal entry, Ms. Jenkins," the female officer said. "We'll file a report, and we can advise you to press charges. However, as it's a landlord-tenant dispute, it often gets complicated in court. Your best bet is to get legal counsel immediately." They also advised me to change my locks, which I did the very next morning, hiring a locksmith to install a heavy-duty deadbolt. That detail mattered later. The locksmith pointed out that the previous deadbolt had been tampered with before, explaining the slight misalignment I'd noticed. Mr. Thorne had likely been trying to pick or force it for a while. This wasn't a sudden impulse. The next day, I contacted the local tenant advocacy group my paralegal friend had recommended. They were appalled by Mr. Thorne's actions. A lawyer from the group, a sharp woman named Ms. Ramirez, took my case. She explained that his renovation claims were likely a pretext to get me out so he could re-rent the apartment at a much higher rate, or even sell it vacant, which often fetches a better price in a hot market like Boston. His actions constituted an illegal eviction attempt, a serious violation of tenant rights. Ms. Ramirez helped me draft a formal letter. It was a certified letter, sent with a return receipt requested, detailing every instance of his harassment, the illegal entry, and his violation of my lease. It cited specific Massachusetts tenant protection laws and stated unequivocally that I would not be vacating my apartment. It also informed him that I had filed a police report and would pursue legal action for damages, including emotional distress, if he attempted any further illegal entries or harassment. We also filed a formal complaint with the city's housing authority. Mr. Thorne's reaction was exactly what Ms. Ramirez predicted. He called me, furious, about 2 days after receiving the letter. His charming facade had completely dissolved. "Sarah, what is this nonsense? You're making a huge mistake." I was trying to be reasonable. "You're going to regret this." He threatened to sue me for defamation, for hindering his property improvements, for everything he could think of. I simply told him to direct all communication through my lawyer, Ms. Ramirez. He tried a few more times to contact me directly, but I blocked his number and forwarded all his emails to Ms. Ramirez. The housing authority's complaint also put pressure on him. They initiated an investigation, which meant he had to provide documentation for his supposed renovations, permits, and a legitimate plan. Of course, he had none. The entire renovation story was a fabrication. The pressure mounted on him, not me. Ms. Ramirez informed him that not only was he facing fines from the housing authority, but I also had a strong case for damages due to the illegal entry and harassment. She suggested that a fair settlement would be for him to pay me a significant sum to voluntarily terminate my lease, far more than the paltry $1,500 he'd initially offered. This would allow him to get his apartment back, but legally and at a cost. It took several weeks of back and forth, but eventually, Mr. Thorne capitulated. He was facing a potential lawsuit, fines, and the hassle of dealing with the housing authority, all because he tried to strong-arm me out of my home. He offered a settlement that was generous enough to cover not just a new security deposit and moving expenses, but also a substantial buffer to find a new place without financial strain. It was enough for me to secure a beautiful new apartment in a different neighborhood, one where I felt truly safe and respected. I moved out 3 months after the break-in. The process was calm, handled entirely through our lawyers. Mr. Thorne never showed his face. On my final walkthrough, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything, I paused at the front door. The new, heavy-duty deadbolt gleamed, a testament to my regained security. But the old, ornate brass lion's head door knocker, the one I had loved so much, was gone. He must have removed it after the police report, perhaps as a final, petty gesture, or maybe just to replace the damaged door. I ran my hand over the smooth, bare wood where it used to be. It was just a small detail, but it felt like a quiet confirmation of what I'd lost, and what I'd gained. That apartment was no longer my sanctuary, but I had learned to stand my ground.